What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this episode of Home Built Workshop. This is episode number 5 of the Great Guitar Build-Off series, and I'm really excited for this episode because in episode 5 we're going to take the body, the neck, and all of these assorted parts, assemble them all together, and at the very end we're going to play some notes on this Haley Guitars Dorian. So stick around. I am so excited to be at this step because finally we're going to get to see everything come together. All of this work that has been going into making the different parts, we now get to assemble a completed guitar. So let's do this. We're going to start off with the neck. Well, really because it's the easiest and I kind of like to be able to check things off the list.
All we really need to do to the neck is install the tuners. This is really easy. They just pop into place. We'll add the washers and the nuts. I'm going to use a wrench just to snug those nuts on the tuners just a little bit. I want them to still move, but not move freely.
Now to line up the back of the tuners, I'm just going to use a straight edge placed along the bottom of the tuners. That way I can make sure that all the edges are nice and flat and straight against the straight edge.
Once I have the tuners lined up nice and straight, now I'm going to tighten down those nuts so that the tuners can't move around. Now I can drill the tiny pilot holes that'll secure the tuners to the back of the headstock.
Before I install these little tiny screws, I keep a little piece of a candle here. I just rub the screw in the wax, get a little wax on the threads. This helps it go into the wood better. You really don't want to break these off because that's not fun at all.
When you're installing screws, especially screws this small, it's really important to do this by hand. It's really not the best idea to do this with a powered screwdriver. A lot of times they'll have too much torque and you can really risk breaking these screws off. So make sure to wax the threads and install these by hand with a screwdriver to really help minimize breaking. Now I'm going to grab a couple of different files and spend a few minutes making sure the nut slot is nice and flat and the nut fits well. We don't want it too loose, but we don't want to have to hammer the thing in there either. And that is looking like a pretty good fit to me. I know I'm going to have to adjust the string slots later on when we're setting this up, but for now, the nut's good.
And I guess now is about as good a time as any to bolt the neck to the body.
To get the neck ferrules to sit nice and flush, I actually had to tap these down, and really I believe this is just because there's some finish in there that caused them to fit just a little bit tighter than they did before. Now a little more wax on the neck screws and we can drive these home.
Ah, look at that. We're getting there.
Now I'm going to put some tape on the body to protect it while I make some measurements and determine the location of the bridge. Now I've used this bridge on quite a lot of builds and I know exactly how far from the edge of the nut that it needs to be, but I still measure it every single time because I don't want to let some random error cause me a bunch of headaches because I didn't take the time to measure.
And now before I go and drill the mounting holes for the bridge, I want to install the 2 outer E strings. That way I can just double and even triple check the alignment, make sure everything lands where it's supposed to on the neck. That way if I need to adjust the position of this, I can do that now rather than drilling the holes and having something in the wrong spot. I'm pretty sure that everything's going to be just fine, but I like to double check. I don't ever just go and drill holes only to find out later that something is amiss.
After triple checking that the bridge is in the right spot, I can finally drill the mounting holes and secure the bridge.
So now I believe I'm at the point where I can start on the electronics, but before we do that, I want to shield this control cavity with some copper foil shielding tape. Now there's a lot of people that'll argue the value of shielding, whether you should use tape, you should use paint, whether you should, whether you shouldn't. I don't worry too much about that. I always at least put the foil tape in there, whether I need it or not, who knows. I add it there, then I don't have to worry about it. Plus, it's really not that expensive and it's kind of fun to do. Now I think I can move ahead and work on getting the pickups mounted. Now these are going to be direct mounted right to the body. We're still going to use the existing mounting tabs, but we need to make a small modification to the height adjustment screws since we won't be using any sort of a trim ring.
I'm going to use the original humbucker height adjustment screws and chuck them up in my drill press. And using a small file, I'm going to file away the threads that are just below the head of the screw. This is going to allow me to thread this bolt onto the humbucker, and when it gets all the way down to the mounting tab, the threads are going to basically disengage the tab of the pickup and allow me to still be able to adjust the height by pressing down on the pickup. We're going to have foam mounted underneath the pickup, so that will allow us to raise the height. The screw will pull it back down, compressing the foam, allowing us to lower the height.
I want the screw to be able to turn free, that way we can thread this down into the body of the guitar without it changing the adjustment here. So it's going to actually disengage from this little threaded tab.
Before I can use these screws to bolt the pickups in place, I need to shorten these screws. They're way too long right now, so I'll just chuck them up in the drill and run them on my belt grinder to shorten them. One advantage of shortening these screws on the belt grinder is that it puts a nice centered point on the end. So now I can put the pickup in place and then use the actual screw to center punch where I need to drill the hole. Now I can reinstall the pickup. This time I'll put some foam underneath and we'll screw them down. And as it turns out, somebody forgot to drill the hole for the bridge ground, so I need to remove the bridge in order to drill that hole. Since I have to drill this hole at an angle, I start with a larger drill bit and then slowly tip the drill until I'm at the angle I need. Then I can switch over to a small drill bit and drill the rest of the hole. And now I can feed the ground wire down through that hole. I'm going to solder one end of the wire to a piece of copper foil shielding tape that's going to get stuck to the underside of the bridge. And after reattaching the now properly grounded bridge, I can now finish installing the bridge pickup.
Now, with the controls all installed, we're ready to wire this thing up. The only thing left to really install is the jack and the jack cup, but I want to solder the wires to the jack before we screw that jack cup down. Let's head over to the bench, get this thing wired up.
First, I'll wire the leads onto the Switchcraft jack so that I can install the jack cup and basically have all the parts on the instrument. Now I'll begin wiring up all of the controls. Now, I know you guys know that there are a million ways that you can wire a guitar for different switching applications, different sounds, different options. There's just so many different ways you can go, so I'm not really going to be going into a ton of detail and tell you exactly how you need to wire your guitar. I will say, though, that one resource that I have found invaluable when I'm trying to determine a wiring diagram is the Seymour Duncan website. This is in absolutely no way sponsored by or affiliated with Seymour Duncan, but their website is a great resource for wiring diagrams. You can basically input the specs of your guitar and it'll give you a ton of different options for wiring your instrument. It's really my go-to resource when I need wiring diagrams. The wiring that I have chosen for this build is pretty standard, really. It's one volume, one tone, and a 3-way switch. We'll have the option for selecting either of the bridge or the neck pickup, or the combination of them both. We're going to keep this one nice and simple. And with that, the wiring is complete. Let's test this thing out and make sure everything's working correctly.
So far, the only issue really is that the pickups are reversed on the switch, so we'll just resolder that really quick to make that thing work correctly. With the wiring complete, now I need to address the frets. I need to mask off this fretboard, and we're going to do a nice fret level and dress. Make sure everything's nice and smooth and there's no high frets in there. So I've got the fretboard all masked off. I've checked it with a notch straight edge to make sure that the fretboard is perfectly flat. We're good to go there. So now we're ready to begin leveling the frets. The first thing that I want to do is just put a line of marker down the top edge of the frets. This just helps you to be able to see what you're working on rather than trying to just look at the top of a, well, shiny metal fret.
To level my frets, I start out with some 320 grit PSA sandpaper stuck to a leveling beam. This removes the bulk of the material and gets everything down to the same level pretty quickly. Then I like to switch to a shorter beam and put just a little bit of fall away in at the higher frets. Then I'll go back over and remove those 320 grit scratches with some 600 grit sandpaper. And now to rebuild the crown on those frets, I'll use a fret crowning file and go back and re-crown all of the frets. Once the frets are all re-crowned, now I need to get them back to a nice shine, and I do that by sanding them with some 1000 grit followed by 2000 grit sandpaper, and finally I'll buff them up using some compound and a Dremel tool. Now I'll untape the fretboard so that we can apply some lemon oil to the rosewood.
Shake well before using.
I love how just a little bit of oil really brings out the grain in this rosewood. It looks cool. There are only a couple things left to do. We're so close to being done. First, I need to install the strap buttons. Followed by the control knobs. And finally, the control cavity cover.
We're ready for strings. Perfect! That's the tuning song. The first time this instrument has ever been tuned to pitch. So let's see. Not even set up or anything right now. And actually, everything's ringing pretty clear. I'm trying to do this backwards. You guys are gonna laugh at me. I'm going to plug this in just to this little jam jar just to get an idea and make sure everything's working okay. guys, that's going to wrap up this episode. I'm going to give this thing a few days to settle in under string tension and then go through and give it a full setup. Stick around for the next episode where we're going to do some sound demos and you guys actually get to hear this playing. Don't worry, it's not going to be me trying to hack it up left-handed. We're going to actually get somebody who can really play this thing, so stick around. It's going to be awesome. We're this close, guys. I can't wait. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time. Sometimes you'd have to just hit these things with a hammer. You know, keep it in line. Show it who's boss. Check it out. I just burned my finger with a soldering iron. It's like all black and stinks. Ugh. That wasn't very smart. I've never been a fan of headstock tuners, but this Peterson strobe tuner, pretty awesome. Oh guys, really quick, one other thing. Don't be that guy. Clip your string ends. Sorry if you're that guy.